Today on Better Book Clubs, Demon Copperhead and David Copperfield. Should you read them together? Barbara Kingsolver's novel Demon Copperhead came out in October of 2022. It won the Pulitzer Prize that year. It won the Women's Prize for Fiction, and it's still in hardback only. It is such a popular book that it hasn't even come out yet in paperback. So I originally thought I might do this video as a preview for you when the paperback was about ready to come out, because I know that a lot of book clubs like to read in paperback only. The last time we were at the bookstore and we asked about the paperback date, we were told it would be April of 2024, but it turns out now that when I look online, it looks like that date is actually September of 24. So I'm gonna go ahead and do this video knowing that eventually you will be able to get your hands on a paperback of this book. It's probably also easier to get at the library now because it's been out for so long, or even a used hardcover copy, and maybe it's time for you to read it with your book club, or at least get it on your list for later this year. So as is kind of obvious from the title, Demon Copperhead is a retelling of Charles Dickens' classic novel, David Copperfield. And so the obvious question arises whether you need to read David Copperfield first in order to really appreciate Demon Copperhead. So when I started asking around about this question, because I was thinking about reading both of them, pretty much everybody I talked to who loved Demon said, no, you don't have to read David. Demon stands on its own and is a really great novel. It's the best novel I've ever read. I mean, like, people were really raving about it, but then it turned out that none of them had actually read David. It's not surprising that a lot of them hadn't read David Copperfield because it's an 850-page novel in Victorian prose, so it's kind of intimidating. It's one of Dickens' longest books. The question was really kind of a burning question for me, and a lot of people were sort of like, oh, well, whatever, and I thought, no, I really want to know, do I need to read both of them in order to appreciate Demon? So I decided I was going to do it. So last fall, my friend Susan agreed to read with me. I kind of recruited her to read with me because I knew it was going to be a big project. And it took us about 9 weeks to read David. We did about 100 pages a week. So there was one week where we kind of cut back because we were, you know, both really busy, but it basically took us 9 weeks. Then we took a couple weeks break, and then we read Demon, and that took us 5 weeks. It's a little bit shorter, but it's also just, it really, you know, the prose really gallops along. So frankly, it's an easier read. So it took us 14, really 16 weeks total to read both novels. So I'm here today to give you my impressions about how useful it was, how important it was, how valuable it was to read David and then Demon. And I'm also going to talk a little bit later about the possibility of flipping that as well. So let me talk first about the basic core reason why I think both of these novels were so successful and so popular, and that is the main character. So in David Copperfield, it's obviously David, and in Demon Copperhead, it's a boy named Damon who goes by the nickname Demon. And in both cases, the story is told in first person. So immediately that gives you the opportunity to kind of get inside his head and begin to empathize with him very early on. So with both of these characters, I found myself becoming really emotionally invested in their stories very early on, like within the first couple of chapters. And because I was emotionally invested in them, I cared about everything else in the novel. So then there's the plot of each of these novels, and they're both sweeping novels. They tell the whole life story, or at least the whole growing up story and young adult story of these two boys. There are a lot of additional characters, a lot of things happen. So both of these stories kind of move along plot-wise. So then I want to talk a little bit about theme. And in both cases, again, the authors are using the novels as a way to highlight an injustice, really more than one injustice. But the focus for Dickens really wanted to show his readers child poverty in Victorian England and bring some sympathy towards these children who were orphaned and were living in terrible circumstances, and kind of draw attention to that issue. He does that over and over again in his work. Of course, we still have that problem today, but Kingsolver is taking a more focused issue, which is the opioid epidemic in Appalachia. I think the same motivation drives her that drove Dickens, which is to really bring this issue to light and to make people who haven't experienced it directly think about it in a very personal way. So without saying too much more about the stories themselves, I will say that probably as a function of it being 300 pages longer, or 350 pages longer, I would say that the context around that story or that theme for David is more well fleshed out. I felt like in Demon, the opioid crisis was a little bit undersold, honestly. And you don't want the novel to become didactic, and I would say that that's not true in either case. Neither of these novels gets preachy. And I think that's a really important thing, and another reason why they're both successful. But I did wish that there's one particular character in Demon who is a salesman for Big Pharma, and I felt like I wished that character had been developed more, and we had just seen a little bit more of the underpinnings of the opioid crisis. But that's really a minor critique. I really enjoyed both of these novels, and I'm really glad that Demon has gotten as much attention as it has. I think it's fantastic. And so the last little note of comparison I'll give you, and then I'll move on to that question of like, do you really need to read both of them, is about the quality of the writing. I will say that it took me a little longer to settle into Kingsolver's writing, but that's because she's writing so effectively from Demon's voice. It wasn't that it was taking me time to settle into Kingsolver so much as it was to settle into Demon. But what I really love about her writing in this book in particular is that she seems to understand teenagers. She just seems to really understand their emotional lives. A lot of adults are really patronizing in their portrayals of teenagers, and Kingsolver is not. She also earned my trust over time in the novel that she knew what she was talking about, which is not to say that I have any credibility in judging that, but for me at least, the novel was totally believable. The voice of it and the details of it and the experience of it. I guess my point is that I felt like the quality of the writing, even though the writing is very different in style and voice in these two novels, I felt like the quality of the writing ultimately was really great in both of them. With one little exception, which is that although there are funny little moments in Demon, I would say that Dickens does humor better. Other than that, I really found that the quality of the writing of both of these books held up together too. So this is not a new thing that Kingsolver is doing, obviously. Other writers have tried to retell stories, but it's a risky thing to do because you better be prepared to be set next to that classic novel, and you better write a book that's good enough to sit beside it, and I think Kingsolver has done that. So back to the question of, do you need to read them both in order to appreciate them? Well, first of all, you don't have to do anything. Nobody can tell you, oh, well, you shouldn't read Demon if you're not going to read David. That's a ridiculous thing to say. So I want to be really clear that I'm not like telling anybody they have to do anything. And actually, the one person that I came across who had read David and then Demon said that she found it really distracting. And that the whole time she was reading Demon, she was like trying to draw parallels to David, and that she really felt that undermined her experience of Demon. The question she finally asked, she said, was, did David Copperfield need to be rewritten? And I think when I finished the novel, my answer to that question was yes, because I feel like David gave Kingsolver a valid framework within which to tell a really important American story. So let me give you a few suggestions if you decide that you want to read both books. First of all, see if you can find a friend to read with. That was really helpful to me as I was working my way through both of these books because it was kind of a commitment. As I said, it took about 16 weeks. And so I think there were times in there where I would have flagged and I would have started feeling like, I don't know, do I really want to do this? Do I really want to finish this? So it was really great to have my friend reading at the same time. A second suggestion is to then set a schedule, which we did. We basically agreed, okay, these are the chapters we're going to read this week. And then we checked in with each other on Sundays. We had an agreement that we were going to email each other about our reading that week. And so we had an ongoing conversation happening on email that really kind of carried us both through the project and made it a lot more fun to have somebody to bounce ideas off of as this was going on. And another recommendation would be kind of in response to what that one friend said to me, not to let one story intrude on the other. And that's maybe easier said than done, but Kingsolver actually makes it very easy in terms of the way she names her characters to tell who's who, and she's not messing around with the story very much. She's obviously updated it and is telling it differently, but it's not that hard to see the parallels. When I found myself sort of like wandering off in that direction, like, well, I think this character isn't as good as it was in Dickens, or I don't understand why she made this choice and not this choice, I would try and just bring myself back and remind myself, I'm just reading this novel now. Bottom line for me is that I definitely enjoyed Demon more for having read David. I would give David a try. I mean, give it a good 100 pages to decide before you put it down, if you're going to put it down. But look, if you enjoy reading Victorian literature, if you enjoy Dickens, if you are up for a good story, it is totally worth the 850 pages to read it just for itself. But then bonus, it's a setup for reading Demon. I really enjoyed both novels. I would say though that I would read them if possible in that order. Because I was really thinking about how would it be different if I had read Demon first and then said, I'm really curious about what inspired Barbara Kingsolver. I'm going to go back and read David. But I think it would have felt backwards in a way to have read Demon first. I think I would have found it more distracting, and I think I would have been more compelled to be trying to draw those connections back to Dickens, and I definitely think I would have had a harder time appreciating David Copperfield for David Copperfield. And that might also be more challenging because David is a harder read. It's a longer read, it's Victorian prose. The slow sections in David were slower than the slow sections in Demon. So I think I would have found that whole experience a little bit less satisfying and a little bit more challenging. Which isn't to say that you shouldn't go back and read David if you've already read Demon and you're thinking about going back and reading David. I don't want to discourage you from doing that because David is a great novel. And it will be interesting, but I think if I had the choice to do it again from scratch, I would still read David first and then Demon. So I'm really curious to hear from those of you who have also read both texts, what your impressions were, whether you would maybe argue to flip it, whether you enjoyed one more than the other, whether you found that same kind of distraction between reading the two. I would love to hear your comments. And for those of you who haven't done it, I hope that you're inspired to give it a try. I'll also mention that I have an earlier video that I did on tips for reading David Copperfield, so you could check that out and maybe that'll help you make your decision. I haven't made a tips video for Demon because you don't really need one. You don't need help reading it. It's written in very recognizable 21st century prose, quite simple and straightforward. The plot moves right along in a chronological manner, so there's not going to be anything challenging in there. But certainly if you're thinking about reading David and you just need a little nudge or you want to kind of think about it, you can take a look at my tips video on reading David Copperfield and see if that's helpful in making your decision. Either way, no matter what you choose, whether you read one of these novels or both of them, I hope you enjoy your reading. I'll be back soon with another episode of Better Book Clubs.